This is Will from UMove, and I am joined today by James Roberts, the branch manager of UMove in Long Eaton, and also the Beeston branch. Matt Stevens from the Mortgage Genie, aka Rebecca Sedgwick, and also Phil May from Apex Law. Firstly, we had a comment on a recent webinar like this that we recorded with an update on the property market, and it's fair to say we realise that there are bigger issues at play right now, but nevertheless there are a lot of people that are moving, in the middle of moves, halfway through selling their properties, and I know James has had a lot of questions from viewers, vendors, landlords, etc. And so we've invited Phil and Matt on to answer, hopefully answer your questions about what's going on in terms of the conveyancing side and also on the mortgage side. So James, if I can hand over to you, what are the top questions that people have been asking you in terms of the legal process right now?
Yeah, so I mean, I guess the first point is that, you know, people still do need to move house. You know, we've got, for example, key workers that are relocating now, people that are, you know, they're expecting and need to find a place to live. So the constant question I'm getting asked by people, firstly, is, you know, should I, A, and B, can I move house? So I guess that's the first question I'd like to ask to you, Phil.
Well, to be fair, that's the question that we're getting asked constantly as well. The legislation is effectively, the law actually states that moving house is a permitted movement. So you're allowed to move out into the street and leave your homes to move house, providing that the move is reasonable. There is no definition as to what's reasonable in the actual legislation. So yet again, it's left open to be relatively ambiguous. The guide that the government has then given alongside that has stated, obviously, if a property is vacant, then a move can go ahead. If basically it involves key workers, then the move should still go ahead, providing social distancing can be achieved and adhered to. Also, there are other scenarios such as escaping abuse, all sort of other scenarios that they kind of list as other bits and pieces. The concern really is that there is still no reason why moves can't happen, providing that either a property is empty and then social distancing is achieved. The realistic problems are that obviously removal companies are all but stopped taking bookings to some extent, although I've heard a number of the big ones are going to say they are now taking bookings from the 21st of April onwards. Why they've picked that date, I don't know. I think that is sort of around about the review date, so they'll probably take bookings and then cancel them again if the lockdown continues, which we all suspect it probably will. And then it is actually weirdly whether or not mortgage companies are going to release funds is a big concern at this present moment in time. Obviously, with the mortgages the way they are, with the banks retracting new lending, the concerns we have that is in 2008 when we had the crash, lenders started putting lending between exchange and completion. So that's another concern. And also the other concern is actually a lot of the law firms have just come out with, we're going to make a company line to not allow anyone to move. And that's another problem that's thrown in. And that's a lot of the bigger guys, to be fair, that have decided just to make company rules up that have no real based on the legislation. Most law firms I have found have continued to enable moves to happen, providing that advice is given to the client and the clients ultimately make the decision as to whether or not they are going to adhere to the social distancing rules, whether the property is vacant and bits and pieces. An example of that is I had 7 move yesterday and I've got 10 booked to move next week. Now that's all with varied law firms and we're all agreed on various bits and pieces. So there are still moves going ahead. So if people are moving house at the moment or concerned about it, what they've got to look at is what are the scenarios to their specific transaction. And I think each law firm has to look at every transaction individually to see whether or not that can continue. The Law Society's guidance is obviously if you've exchanged contracts, you're supposed to, if it's empty, go ahead and complete it. If it's key work, go ahead and complete it. If it's occupied, you're supposed to be looking to see whether you can vary the dates. But the variation of dates once a contract's in place is becoming almost impossible because the arguments between lawyers end up outweighing the situation. So I think most of those moves are going ahead, but that will die away as the weeks go past. I think if people are moving right now, it's a matter of, if you've got a mortgage offer out, I think you get yourself to a point of exchange. Your lawyer should still be working and getting you to a point of exchange of contracts, still signing contracts in the normal way, although probably via scanned copy rather than postal copies of bits and pieces. And then looking at the individual transaction as to whether or not the move can go ahead in this period. The problem we all know is that basically the social lockdown is an open-ended situation that we've got. And the market is, people still need to move ultimately. And there is no official restriction at this present moment in time stopping anybody from physically moving. So that is the position as we see it as lawyers. We are still moving people, and I think many other lawyers are doing the same thing, providing obviously the clients are advised as to the suggestions by the government, the guidelines, and also social distancing. And that is the position as it stands. As I say, there's many of them still going ahead. Most of them are going to simultaneous exchange and completion, which comes with its own problems. And again, the clients need to be advised individually in each case. And that will work with some clients, and some clients it's just not going to work with, especially if they've got long distance moves, etc.
Yeah. So I guess anyone that is moving currently, your advice really is that it has to be assessed on a case by case basis. Exactly.
I don't think you can make a, like a lot of law firms seem to be doing, saying, right, unless you've exchanged contracts and your property's empty, we're going to stop everybody moving. I think that's generally law firms that have got lots of other strings to their bow, so they've got other income from other areas of law, and they're just thinking, right, we'll just shut the conveyancing department down and leave that for a period. We haven't got to worry about getting involved with advising people and bits and pieces. Mm-hmm. There has to be an additional level of advice from the individual lawyer to their client and have a lengthy discussion with them so they are fully understanding as to the risks involved, bearing in mind of things such as whether or not mortgage funds are actually available, whether or not they can get removals, and then also advising them to make sure that they're adhering to social distancing. Ultimately, we aren't police, and we're not here to police people to tell people what they should be doing in respect of the law. We just give them the guidance, and we're here to advise. The clients then make their choice, and then ultimately from the advice we give them, they can make a choice as to making sure that they are adhering to the government's proposals. But when the government allowed added moving house to their list of permitted reasons to leave your home, it is relatively loose as to the reasons why. I mean, a reasonable purpose seems relatively weak to me, because what's reasonable to you will be very different to reasonable to me, isn't it?
Interpretation, isn't
it? Yeah. So, and I had that conversation on a daily basis when I had one with a client yesterday who's looked at the legislation himself and said, well, it's reasonable for me because my new job's in wherever I'm going and I need to move there. Mm-hmm. Well, the next person you're buying from, it may not be reasonable to them because they're only moving up the road or whatever. I tend to find it that it's odd because most of them, you can limit the physical contact between people. And that's why I find it a little bit odd that they're limiting it. They're sort of, the guidance muddies it a little bit by saying, oh, you should only do it if this and only do that. Because actually, if you think of most transactions, with the exception of contact with your removal company, the actual physical contact between people is very limited. Mm-hmm. And weirdly, in respect to social distancing, most people, once they go to their new house, are going to be more encouraged to stay indoors and do all the work to their new property they've just moved into than to be going out and about, So I do think it's a double-edged situation, and I think we need to be a bit more positive in respect of saying to people, look, your transaction's still going on. It's not, it's not the end of the world. There's a lot more important things going on in respect of people's health, but actually, if the move will still continue, we'll still progress it, and we'll judge them case by case as to whether or not you can move. And some people will go, I want to stick to what the government is saying and the guidelines with that, and we'll wait and see what happens. And other people will say, no, I've assessed it, I need to move. I've got reasonable cause to move. I can limit the social distancing. The property I'm moving to is empty, for instance. We can get it done. Or in a chain, for instance, what people don't seem to get is, I said it, I had one yesterday in a chain. The top of the chain's a probate, so that's empty. Well, the person in the middle is going to move to that property. That property in the middle is then going to be empty by the time that people get there. Ultimately, the argument is that that's fine. I don't buy into this thing saying, oh, the house has got to be disinfected and all this sort of thing before people move in. But that's down to the individual choice, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So just one final question, Phil. Just bringing it back to people that are on the market now and haven't necessarily, accepted an offer, but we are still seeing that people are still putting in offers, albeit via virtual viewings, or people have came back to properties, etc. So what advice would you give to people that have received an offer? Can they accept that? Can they get things moving with searches?
I think you'll find that ultimately you should, the customers and the clients will have should treat their buying properties the same way as they always have done. Ultimately, the market hasn't stopped. Yes, there are restrictions on some of the things you guys can do in respect of viewings, etc. But ultimately, the properties are still available. The market is still there. You can make your offers. You can get your transactions moving. The limits to the transactions will be, at this present moment in time, mortgages, who is not my area, so I'll let the other comment more on that. But obviously, restrictions on the level of funding and surveying and valuations of bits and pieces. So they're going to naturally grind a number of transactions to halt. The other situation, which is going to be a problem, which we're starting to see, is that the actual searches are becoming an issue, because a number of local authority offices are now shutting. For instance, Greenwich, I'm down in Kent, so in South London, Greenwich was totally shut. So their entire council offices are shut. So that's all housing services, that's all searches are now stopped, and that's for indefinite period. So there'll be nothing, if you're buying a property in that area, for instance, there are going to be no searches done. Obviously, there are various ways and means around searches. If you're not buying with a relatively high value mortgage, or if you're buying cash from sale, etc., then there are options to look at search insurance and the various options that you can discuss with your lawyer as to providing, the search insurance would provide a financial indemnity cover against an adverse search. And most local searches are quite limited as to some of the information now, and there's a lot more investigation that's going around it. So that's always a viable option for people, especially buying if they're cash purchasers, investment purchasers, especially low loan to value purchasers. Quite often, search insurance, etc., is an option for those types of buyers. So there are still plenty of things people can do to keep their transaction going and get it moving, so that basically, what we're going to all realise is that this lockdown situation isn't going to last forever. None of us can say how long it's going to go on for. Most of us believe probably we're looking at June time before we're getting any sort of relaxation on lockdown, but most of us are guessing at that. None of us have any official knowledge, but we're thinking that's the way it's going to probably go. That's the indication. Most of us are guessing it's May to June before we're going to see any form of relaxation on, especially our industries. But we therefore need to work on a basis of, okay, we can get the ones we can get through now. So empty properties and that will get people moved, and those essential moves and reasonable moves done now. And other transactions, we can progress your transaction to a point whereby when this is released, your transaction can move very quickly to a moving date, mm-hmm. and get you moved, get your transaction realised for whatever purpose you're doing, whether you're investment, you're selling for probate, or you're buying to move. Ultimately, there are various reasons, but you can get to that point very quickly. And once the restrictions on moving are released, there will be you'll be able to literally progress relatively quickly to getting your moving date. Yeah. So there's plenty you can do, but unfortunately, you're going to find the retraction in the market and then the restrictions on movement, and probably like you guys and many other law firms, the numbers of firms that are having to furlough staff to reduce overheads is going to impact on some speed that you would normally find. But most law firms are having to continue as we always are. You know, we can't work on the basis the market's not been stopped. So the market is as it has always been. There's no, as you say, guys. I mean, I'm still getting new transactions coming through the door. Probably, you know, as many this week as I've seen. So it's encouraging in that respect. And I'm encouraged by the people that are still the number of people that still want to move. So we're progressing files to a point of going, right, move those ones, get those points to exchange, and let's get those exchanged and moved as soon as we get some relaxation of the restrictions on movement.
Brilliant. Yeah, really.
Well, thank you so much, Phil. That was from what's a fairly confusing situation. You've added quite a lot of clarity there, so that was really useful. So I know you've got clients and your time is valuable. So we're going to move on to mortgages. If you want to sign off, you're welcome to stay.
I might hang around because, to be fair, that end of the market also affects mine, and I'm interested from that end as to how that is currently experiencing. I hear a lot of rumours from that end, but same thing as it creeps back down, but we don't necessarily get to get the actual true picture. So I'm interested to know what the mortgage side of things are.
Yeah, I'd agree with what Phil says there. It's the same for us, vice versa. You know, we hear quite a bit on the conveyancing and the legal side, but it's great to hear what you just added there, Phil.
So Matt, I guess the first question that we always get asked now by buyers is, you know, given the current circumstances, should I be making a purchase now, and can I still obtain finance?
Yeah, and we asked this as advisors. I've been reached out by a number of kind of media and other kind of partners and things like that just this week alone. And the answer is yes. Mortgage lenders are lending. In fact, in reality, it's probably classed as a buyer's market right now. If you're a buyer and you're working in a restricted market or a market with some reduced demand, then you can normally find extremely good value, but it has to be right now. You know, so if you're serious and you're active, you need to speak to property specialists like yourself, James, and the buyers are going to be able to pick up. Well, they're going to have your attention and loads of your time, but they'll probably be able to find value as well. Looking at the lending side, the banks, and we work with obviously now on 100 in the market of kind of mainstream banks, high street banks, building societies, and specialist lenders, and they are lending. There has been certain restrictions put on loan to value limits, as Phil rightly mentioned, but that's typically driven by the fact that those banks have got strict criteria, and they will want to see a physical valuation on a property that's got a mortgage applied for with a loan to value typically higher than 75 or 80%. But what a lot of the banks are doing in any event is trying the very best to pull an automated desktop valuation or electronic valuation. And if that fails, that doesn't give the answers that the actual bank or the buyer wants to see, then the banks have, and I've seen a couple of examples this week where drive-by valuations have actually been booked in. So maintaining that social distancing, okay. So let's see what happens on those, but really, to answer your question in one word, yes, lenders are still lending, and can buyers still be active in this market? Absolutely, yes.
Brilliant. So just moving on to sellers, Matt. On the, you know, we're still getting valuations come in on a day by day, and people considering whether, you know, they do stay, remortgage, you know, perhaps their mortgage is coming up within the next 6 months. Of course, we don't know how long this may potentially last. So would you advise people, if they are within that 6-month period, to start looking at renewing now? Or
I would say, yeah, I'm going to put my financial advisor hat on. If that end date is pretty much within the next 6 months, maybe just even if you can incorporate a 7-month period, you want to be speaking to an advisor and really finding out your options straight away. If somebody's decided to put a move on hold, then there's certain things we can do for short-term financial security for those clients. But however, if somebody's totally gone off the idea of moving, then they've got to absolutely ensure that they don't go anywhere near what would be classed as the standard variable rate or the reversionary rate on their current mortgage, because they're typically as an average in the market, it's around about 2 to 2.5% higher than the average fixed rate. So you got to really kind of identify or understand your own position as a buyer, and as a seller, and if you decided against the move, then yeah, absolutely, you want to make sure that you're kind of locking everything down on a financial front, mitigating any sort of risk. And while lenders are still lending, and we don't know how long this is going to go on for, you need to take that advice. What we've found, and it's an interesting question you pose, because we've found a lot of people either request payment holidays or clients be moved to reduced working hours and reduced income, or even furloughed workers. Okay. So in these examples, and if anyone meets any of this criteria, then I'd really suggest some proper one-on-one advice from an advisor, because if you're in the middle of, let's say, and you've requested a payment holiday because your income's been negatively affected by the current circumstance, then a financial advisor would typically still have access to retention products or certain remortgage products from either your existing lender or a kind of a hand-selected few other lenders. If you've had no effect to your income and you're still working and good on you, of course, if you're self-employed and everything's income is as it was, then you're going to have the full market to look at. If you have been furloughed or you're on reduced hours, then what I'm going to suggest anybody does, and they are looking at the remortgage side, is that they get something in writing. Make sure you've got something in writing from your lender, your employer, which details your income, the new structure of your hours, and hopefully has got a proper return to work date, as much as they could estimate, as it were, or anticipate. And that'll give the lenders that extra bit of peace of mind when they are considering a remortgage application from you,
Brilliant. So to put in a nutshell, just from a buying perspective now, Matt, if you're looking at an LTV of around 75%, you could still move forward with minimal delays. If you're, say, a first-time buyer with a 5%, 10% deposit, how would that look for you now? Would you still advise people to go out there and make offers on properties?
Yeah, I mean, I really would. If you're talking with that level of deposit, anywhere really from 20% plus, then you probably won't actually, suffer, any sort of real delays in the market. Again, as I said, from a buyer's point of view, you might be able to get yourself extremely good value. Thinking about the logistical side with the lender, then absolutely there's provisions put in place by these lenders now, and they are reacting as quickly as they can react, but they are kind of going to the really that extra mile to make the market as fluid as it can be right now. Lenders did focus in the middle of March and through to the end of March on obviously their vulnerable customers, okay, and rightly so. So those people whose income had reduced or had stopped, or those people who've been unfortunately let go before the furlough scheme had been rolled out and things like that, the lenders had really reacted, and they all pulled together and agreed the payment holiday situation and the fact that it wouldn't negatively affect someone's credit file or the credit worthiness, which is great. And now all of these lenders are pretty much set up and on the same page for the vulnerable customers. They're now actually looking at turning the retentions to actually the logistical side for the staff. How are they working from home? Are they able to? Are they still able to progress things? I know I can tell you straight away, NatWest absolutely blew everybody out the water. They moved all of their underwriting team to home, days before the other lenders had managed to do so, and they went with great transition, and they had no downturn in their output as well, which was really impressive. So that's the front end staff are working from home, the underwriters are working from home. Phil's confident on the legal and the conveyance and the back end side. Then for people with a 20% plus deposit, they should see very little restriction in the market. One area, obviously, that has slowed down is a slightly higher loan to value. products and buyers, but there's still things that can be done for them, and there's still extremely good value, of course. Let's not forget, in the mortgage market itself. I know we saw two little drops of the base rate there, but a total of 0.65%. So with that in mind, anyone who has had a purchase delayed, or if they were waiting, they had an application in or an offer produced and they were looking to move, let's say, the beginning of the summer or something like that, and unfortunately they've been caught up in all of this, well, kind of don't despair. You've got that product. You'll either have the offer produced or you'll have your application underway. That's great. If you've got an application underway and you took a product kind of before the base rate reduced, then if they want a second opinion, now is the time to have a second opinion, because it could be that they're actually not going to see their purchase delayed. And that's because, obviously, with everything that's going on, as we know it, but so why not have a second opinion on that? Because there might be a better product or a more suited product for you. Or if your current lender who you've applied to, your current application dictates that they need a physical valuation because of that specific lender's criteria, then if they come for a second opinion, then we might be able to find a lender that'll actually, do the same product or a better product, but they'll do a desktop or an electronic valuation and then remove the need for a physical visit to the property that they're looking to purchase. So we've helped people in that instance, and that's a real good example and something I'd really like to kind of drive home. And similarly, for people or buyers who've actually had offers produced, they could have had a mortgage offer produced, by the end of Feb or the beginning of March. And the legal guys are doing the last bit of work that they need to do, and we're looking to set an exchange or a completion date. If you aren't at that point yet, and you think that purchase or the exchange might be delayed, again, second opinion. We know that the base rate reduced. We've now started to see lenders start to move products as well. So it's a real good time to actually speak to somebody who's got access to the full market. It could be absolute advice to say, no, the product you've got is really suitable for you. And you've already had your offer produced, which obviously means the valuation's already been carried out or it's already been signed off. So we'll either give that as an answer, or alternatively, we can say, actually, you were looking at this lender with a product rate of X. Well, there's a product over here that's going to, save you an extra 40, 50 quid a month, something like that, because they're changing the rates. So for buyers, this is, again, a real good time. Takes a little bit of pressure off. All I'd say is just a couple of things here. We're saying to a couple of clients, don't compare this to a financial crash. Yes, everything has slowed down, but this isn't caused by negligence from a market or an industry or anything like that, and to be quite honest, what we're seeing here is the banks and building societies are doing absolutely everything they can to maintain a fluid market and give buyers, sellers, the support they need,
Great stuff. Great stuff.
Fantastic. Thank you, Matt. And it's fascinating to hear that. I mean, obviously, health and staying safe and all of that is the top priority for everybody right now. But there are people that need to move, and it's encouraging to see that the industry has responded quickly to enable that to happen. I mean, it's possible now with virtual valuations, virtual viewings, remote legal services, remote mortgage advice, that people could sell and move without being in front of another human being throughout the whole process. So thank you both for joining us. So for anyone that has any further questions on either subject, I'm sure, Matt, Phil, you'll be happy for us to pass on any questions that we get.
Yeah, by all means.
Absolutely, yeah. We've got the full advisory team, all departments now set up and ready and working from home, and we're here till 8 p.m. all week. So it's any questions, if anyone wants to bounce ideas, if we can help, obviously, with any of the conveyancing side, Phil, for you and your team, if you've got any questions.
I'm like you. My team's all now working from home. I'm the only one in the office like you guys, so everyone else is at home. But yeah, we're sort of still running. We're continuing to progress as much as we can. So yeah, if anybody's got any questions, especially even if it's just they're not sure what they should be doing or should be doing, or even if they haven't purchased or made an offer yet, but they just want some generic advice, then by all means they can get in contact, and we'll sort of try and give them some advice, generic advice as to what's happening in the conveyancing end of things at this present moment in time.
So Phil's company is Apex Law, and Matt's is Mortgage Genie. So you can look them up for more information, or come through to ourselves. But otherwise, thanks again, Matt, Phil, for joining us. That was a really useful discussion. Thanks, James, and we'll sign off from there. Any questions, please feel free to get in touch.